Good afternoon. I'm Tom Schatz, president of Citizens Against Government Waste. And if it seems that every day there is another report about a city, county, or state facing financial failure due to excessive employee-related expenses, there is a reason for this perception. It is true. From the unaffordable increase that Chicago just awarded its teachers, to the 3 California cities that declared bankruptcy in July and August, to think tanks, websites, and blogs that regularly report on this issue, a problem that once seemed unlikely is now becoming an epidemic. Citizens Against Government Waste is today expanding on its efforts to shine a spotlight on this critical issue by announcing the release of the first report of our new public pension education project. Public Servants or Privileged Class is a unique analysis of compensation for state employees compared to private sector employees. The report shows that the average state employee makes 6.2% more in wages and benefits than the average private sector employee for the same category of jobs. The analysis was based on the National Compensation Survey of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the categories run from architecture and engineering to transportation. Nationally, no state government pays its employees on par or below what the private sector pays its employees. They all pay more. Texas has the largest difference in pay, while California has the highest hourly wages compared to the private sector. Utah and Montana compensate their employees closest to the private sector, but it's still higher. The largest percentage difference in pay is 40% across 3 categories, and the largest amount in pay and difference is $61 per hour. The analysis in CAGW's report was not easily achieved because the Bureau of Labor Statistics does not publicly reveal the information that state governments provide them on compensation. And the methodology used in this report will be discussed in more detail by John Dunham, who delved into the depths of the BLS to dig up all the details. This unique report provides grades for the first time for each state and for each job category within each state. The map shown here is color-coded with grades for each state of A through F, and it is also available on our website, cagw.org. The report also shows a list of states with compensation differential by rank and total compensation by rank. The significance of compensation in the unaffordability of public pensions was shown in a USA Today article which highlighted the stark difference between public and private sector compensation and benefits. Between 2002 and 2009, public employees received $1.17 in new benefits for every dollar per hour wage increase, while private sector employees received only 58 cents, or half of what the public sector employees receive per dollar increase in wages. One result of this disproportionate increase in benefits is a $2 to $4 trillion unfunded liability nationwide for state and local governments. The pension crisis has forced state and local governments to cut basic services from police protection to paving potholes. For example, starting in 2010, San Diego, on a rotating basis, shut down firehouses. The actions were necessary because over the prior decade, while revenue only went up 20%, firefighter wages and benefits increased by 100%. The highest paid city employees are upper-level members of the fire department, who make more than $180,000 per year, and those with 30 years of service can retire at age 50 with 90% of their salary. I suspect that there are very few taxpayers in San Diego or anywhere else in the country, the people that pay for these benefits, who get such generous retirement. San Jose City Councilman Pete Constant will give a first-hand report on the impact that excessive public employee wages and benefits have had on taxpayers in his city, and also what they've done to try to control those expenditures. The news about troubled states and cities continues to proliferate. On September 18th, Standard & Poor's downgraded New Jersey's debt outlook from stable to negative, while Camden, which has the state's highest crime rate, is laying off 270 police officers this year. Warren Buffett has called the money owed to public sector retirees a time bomb, while top Wall Street analyst Meredith Whitney called local and state debt the biggest threat to the U.S. economy. While many cities, counties, and states have taken steps to address this compensation conundrum, others are seeking assistance from a higher authority. Yesterday, Bloomberg News reported that the mayor of Atwater, California, asked for prayers as her city votes next week on whether or not to declare bankruptcy. Unfortunately, solving the pension crisis will take more than faith. It will take leadership that makes tough decisions on compensation and benefits that clearly were not made correctly in the past. Hardworking Americans who are struggling to pay their bills, find a job, or find enough money to set aside for retirement are being forced to pay for these extravagant employee compensation packages. These employees are supposed to be public servants, not a privileged class. Citizens Against Government Waste is proud to sound the clarion call to restore fiscal sanity to this problem. A good place to start is by holding elected officials accountable for this massive waste of tax dollars. The taxpayers, not special interests, deserve better. Now, Pete Constant will talk about what's going on in San Jose. Go ahead, let's switch.
Thank you. The city of San Jose has been faced with an incredible financial crisis over the last decade. In fact, we've had 10 straight years of huge budget deficits. And many people have asked me, how did we get there? And the single largest driving factor that pushed our financial crisis downward or forward was the fact that we have an incredible rise in pension contribution costs. We have two independent pension systems that together face a nearly $3 billion unfunded liability. And many people say, well, how does that translate to services in the city of San Jose? Well, we had to lay off thousands of people, eliminate thousands of jobs, lay off police officers, lay off firefighters. We have 4 brand new libraries that have been constructed, built, completely outfitted, and they have fences around them. The children in our neighborhoods stare at a library that they can't go into. We have a $93 million police substation that was designed, planned for, and built in order to bring efficiencies to our police department to save taxpayers money. It is sitting with a fence around it. We're unable to open it because of the severe cuts in employees that we've had to make. To illustrate why we're facing this crisis, just 10 years ago, if you compare 2001 to 2011, the city's portion of contributions for pensions went from $73 million a year to $245 million a year. This current fiscal year that we're in, we exceed $250 million in contributions to pensions. And the way we got there is quite simple. We had elected leaders that made promises that we simply can't keep. In the good years, pay was raised. In the bad years, benefits were raised because elected officials knew that they could make promises that someone else would have to deal with later. And I want to illustrate this point by talking about how it affected an individual police officer. I was a police officer that left our police department in the year 2000. At that time, a police officer at Top Step made $72,000 a year and had an 80% pension. So when you do the math, that's about a $58,000 a year pension. In a period of 10 years, that pay rose to $118,000 a year, and the pension benefit was boosted by just 10% to 90% pension. Well, when you do the math there, you see that that brings a pension of $106,000 a year. In 1 decade, the cash pension benefit to an employee doubled in 10 years. And it's simple to see that that's simply unsustainable. We know that in the city of San Jose. We cannot sustain ourselves that way. So what we've had to do is look for plenty of different ways to cut expenses. We rolled back employee pensions, our employee pay, by 10%. Unfortunately, the pension system still pays employees their pension based on their highest average salary. So even though that police officer's pay may have been reduced to $106,000 this year, their 90% pension will net them a $106,000 pension for the rest of their life. To illustrate how much money we've put into the police department, in those 10 years, we've increased funding in our police department by 47%, or in dollars, $100 million more towards police officers and public safety. But during that same time period, we had to reduce personnel in our police department by 20% in order to afford them. The math simply doesn't add up. Elected leaders need to stand up. They have to have the courage to make the tough decisions like they've done in San Diego, like we've done in San Jose, to address this pension issue head on. We need to reduce pensions, not only for future employees, but look at ways to address the unfunded liabilities today, how we can start reducing cities' obligations so that elected leaders don't need to go to the public and ask them to pray for better times ahead. We need to have the courage to make these decisions. We need to stand up and do what's right for our taxpayers so those children can go into that library and not just admire the colors of the paint from outside. So I hope taxpayers, elected officials from one end of our nation to the other stand up, address this issue head on, because quite frankly, when my 5 children are ready to have their children, most of our cities will not have any services to speak of for their residents. And that's just not a future that I want for my children or their children. So I just implore everybody, stand up, let's make changes. This is all fixable. It just takes courage and fortitude for us to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Knock that over. Good afternoon. I'm John Dunham. I'm an economist, which is kind of a scary thing to say to most people. When Citizens Against Government Waste asked us to do this study, I was excited for 2 reasons. First, I'm a big believer that good information leads to good policy and good decisions. And this was a way to get some good information out to elected officials, to the media, to the general public. I also thought it was going to be really easy. So as a businessman, I was like, God, this is great. This is easy money for me. I was right on one count, at least. Getting information out is a good idea. This was really, really difficult to do. And the reason behind that is that information on government salaries, government wages and benefits is just not readily available. The Bureau of Labor Statistics puts out a lot of information on wages and benefits, but they don't break out state government, local government, and federal government employees. They don't break that data out, and they definitely don't break it out by state, even though they have that data. So we had to go through a very extensive modeling process. It took weeks to come up, to solve really 3,600 variables to determine what the wages and benefits were across different job categories and across states. And fortunately, we've been able to do it. I'm very proud to say we've been able to do it. And we found some really interesting things. Everybody's heard that on aggregate, state government employees are paid more than private sector employees. That data has been out there for a long time. But we've never been able to look at the detail. And now we can really see where that's happening. We can see what states have issues with differentials in wages and benefits. And we can determine where, in terms of what kinds of jobs, what kinds of occupations, there are big differentials. In some cases, the government pays low compared to the private sector. If you're a lawyer, you definitely don't want to work for the government. If you're a mathematician, you don't want to work for the government. But if you're a maintenance worker, if you're a groundskeeper, if you're an administrative person, the government pays extensively more, a lot more, across all of the states than does the private sector. So now we have that data set. Now we can actually look at it and we can make decisions. Policymakers can make decisions based on real data. They can compare states with each other. And we did that. I graded them like I graded my students on a curve. So even the best states, the states with A, still pay state workers more than the private sector pays similar workers. But at least we can now compare rankings. We can see what states are doing well compared to which other states, and what states are doing well in different job categories. So I'm really excited that we were able to do this. I think it makes a great new data set available, and Citizens Against Government Waste in this report has made that data all available to everybody. So I thank CAGW for letting me do this, and I look forward to seeing it get used.
And before we take questions, we're going to show a video that shows the contrast between just one job category, 2 people doing the same thing, one for the state government, one for the private sector. And this, again, will be up on our website and up on YouTube.
Meet Bob. He's an architect. Meet Jerry. He's also an architect. Bob works for a private company. Jerry is a state government employee. Bob drives a nice car. Jerry's car is 40% nicer. Bob has a lovely home. Jerry's home is 40% lovelier. Bob gets paid $88,000 each year in salary, pension, and health benefits. Jerry gets 40% more than Bob for the same work. Bob's taxes help pay for Jerry's higher standard of living. Jerry doesn't help Bob that much. The fact is, on average, state government employees make more than their private sector counterparts for the same work. One reason for this unfair advantage is that they get huge retirement pensions that drain taxpayers. That helps explain why cities and states across America are going bankrupt, and why there isn't enough money for basic government services, from police protection to paving potholes. State government employees are supposed to be public servants, not a privileged class. Taxpayers know it's not fair, it's not affordable, and it can't go on. Learn why at cagw.org.
Thank you, and with that, we will open it up for questions to any of the speakers. Yes, sir.
I'm trying to understand the difference here. So Utah ranks number one because it pays the closest to the state and private sector pays, correct? But on compensation alone, it only gets a C. Is that because benefits are?
Well, I'll let John talk about that.
Yeah, there are two ways of looking at it. We grade it across separate job categories. So in some cases, a state might be an A state, but it might be an F in administrative salaries. In terms of the average, the overall average, Utah and Montana had the lowest overall average differential, but the grading is the combination of all the different grades together to get their A, B, C, D, or E. Like it's like a report card, right? You might do really well in PE, but you kind of lousy in math, and it averages that.
But it's fair to say that Utah is the best state that's closest to the private sector.
Utah, on average, overall is closest to the private sector.
And of course, California's at the opposite end. So.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about your survey methodology? You mentioned in here that BLS it was maybe not all that transparent in the past, the information that the states were providing to BLS. How did you do it this time in order to, what did you have to go through to get that information enough to create some of these statistics?
Yeah, this was really interesting, actually. I can find out more about how much lettuce is produced in the country and where it's produced than I can about government wages, actually. The BLS collects data, collects extensive data from every employer, from federal employers, from state employers, from private employers, and they have these huge databases. But they don't release all of that data, and there's a number of reasons that they don't in their legislation. In the case of governments, that it's because there's one employer, and they don't release data from one employer. They also, we've had conversations that they weren't exactly sure that the data was particularly great. But we were able to get data that was national by state, and we were able to get state data broken out by job category. So we had to build something called a linear programming model. I can talk to you about that later. This is what I go to school for a long time to learn how to do, and it really is hard. And that's how we were able to break out the individual, 35,000 individual wage numbers and benefit numbers.
But obtaining it across different occupations, it was kind of the secret that allowed you to create that model when overall data wasn't readily.
Yeah, I can only get it from, at a national level that way. So we had to break out this. It's breaking out those individual state data points. It's not available normally.
Let me add one thing to that. One of the things, and it's mentioned in the report, is that the BLS itself had two research economists that released a report, I believe the end of last year, that showed a range of 3 to 11% in terms of differential compensation, state employees versus private sector, and we're certainly in that range. And other reports on this subject have come up with the same kind of general range, but the difference here is that based on John's excellent work that I had to read several times to figure out myself, it is a unique look at each state and each category within the state, and we would love to have the real information. If BLS wants to come out and say, oh, that's not quite right, great, tell us what it is. Because the other way to do it is to issue a Freedom of Information Act request to the thousands of state agencies around the country, because they would release the data. Then you'd have to re-aggregate it all, and then you couldn't be sure they're giving you 2009, 2010. It's certainly a complex effort, and one that we're very proud to be publishing today. Other questions? All right, well, thank you very much, and we're available afterwards if anyone has any other questions, and thank you very much, and thank you, Pete, for coming all the way from San Jose, and thank you, John, for coming from New York and for putting this together. Thanks.